Hello, this is David Benowitz, Head of Research at Drone Analysts. Today, I'm here bringing you our Commercial Industry Trends panel for DJI AirWorks 2020, where we grab industry leaders all across the industry to talk about the industry trends, what's happening, what's new, and what's happening in the future. Today, I'm joined by a lot of leaders throughout the drone industry, and I'm pretty excited on just the breadth of the drone industry leaders that we have here today. Before we jump into the topics, I'll just let each one of them introduce themselves individually. So we'll hop on just based off the Zoom order. So Brett, I'm passing it over your way.
Thanks, David. Excited to be here. My name is Brett Conda. I'm the UAS Business Development Manager at FLIR Systems under the Industrial Technology segment. I'm responsible for our global sales, policy efforts, and software partnerships. I've been at FLIR for almost 2 years now, and prior to that, I spent 2.5 years working for the FAA UAS Integration Office, where I ran the Nevada test site. And prior to that, I spent 4 years running my own drone service provider. So been in the industry since the end of 2012 and excited to be on this panel again.
Thanks, Brett. And we were just discussing before, Brett's officially the longest or original drone industry joiner of the panel today.
Feels
Dan,
like it.
Dan, who's the second oldest droner. Would you introduce yourself next?
Of course, my pleasure. And thanks for having me. Thanks for having us on the panel. So yeah, I'm Dan Burton, founder and CEO of DroneBase. We're based here in Santa Monica, California. As to your point, have been operating since 2013, 14. And previously, I've worked at Goldman Sachs, was an infantry officer in the Marine Corps, and worked in the U.S. Senate.
Perfect. Matt, you're up next.
Hi, everybody. I just realizing that I'm just down the street from Dan. I recently moved, I don't know if I told you guys, from DC to west side of LA. So I'm on the border of Venice and Santa Monica. But for introduction's sake, I lead Deloitte's commercial market offerings for its sensing and I lead its sensing and aero solutions practice. So drones are one of the components inside of that, really focused on bringing end-to-end solutions and playing the integrator role for our clients, mostly around leveraging drones and like technologies for data collection and logistics plays. Since everybody else gave it, I've been in the industry for 2014, 2015, around there formally, when we stood up a very similar practice, and I led it at PwC before we transferred the team over to Deloitte and partnered up with some other good leaders in our firm and others in the industry like Dan and Brett to do some of the things we're bringing to market today.
Ah, awesome. And Sonal, last but certainly not least.
Hi, thank you for having me here, David. I'm Sonal. I'm the product manager for US R&D, DJI Research. I lead different products that are being worked on at our DJI's Palo Alto office. A little background about me: I'm traditionally an aeronautical engineer, started off as a structural design engineer for aircraft, and then turned towards drone industry in 2017. So youngest in the drone industry, but I guess traditionally aerospace, been here for about 8 years now. I've been focused on B2B products primarily. Before DJI, I was with Kitty Hawk. So yeah, my primary focus has been B2B products with a passion for bringing commercial drone usage to their full potential. So yeah, happy to be here to voice my opinion about this amazing industry we all are in.
Got it. Thank you, Sonal. Yeah, we're very excited to have everyone here today. I guess I didn't include my year, but I joined the drone industry in 2015 at DJI. So as we get started, I'm very excited just once again to welcome the panel. We have everyone from kind of the hardware side to the services side, and kind of client-facing to kind of innovation side as well. So I'm very excited about the breadth of everyone's experience here today. As we get started, it's 2020, we have to, of course, talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact it's had on the drone industry. Certainly we've seen a lot of new applications arise or maybe hasten in their adoption due to COVID-19, especially when it comes down to medical deliveries. Of course, enterprises will turn more faster and faster towards digital technologies during this period. But there's also signs that it might slow down some enterprise adoption as everyone's obviously increasingly risk averse. Dan, I'd just like to first jump to you. DroneBase, with your largest, incredibly large service network, you guys were very early on outspoken about how your service network has been increasing its utilization during this time. Can you speak to just the growth you've seen and also the applications that have been mostly seen your network being used for?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like that old quote where sometimes nothing happens for decades, and then decades happen within a few weeks, and that's sort of what it felt like back in March and April this year. Our team at DroneBase kind of sent everybody home in early March, said, "Hey, see you in 2 weeks," and here we are, right? All still working remotely. So, I think, frankly, coronavirus and 2020 have been a moment for our industry. They've been a moment for this technology. It's felt like that here at our company, DroneBase. I mean, I just say, again, with the data point of one company, but we've had kind of a record March, April, May, June, having a really great summer. Look forward to a great fall as well. We stayed sort of 99.8% operational. For us, that means kind of missions complete on schedule, kind of the whole way through coronavirus. And just a lot of lessons learned for us. I mean, to some degree, that's precipitated by our model of having the best local profession, having the best professionals sort of local to an asset. So our model is never predicated on people getting on a plane or even traveling extensive distances. But I just think that, frankly, this technology, our industry, is just a fantastic way to perform a contact-free inspection of a commercial or industrial asset. Even maybe a year ago, honestly, we felt like we were very dialed into value props, just core value propositions, right? We can do an inspection faster, we can do it more affordably, it's safer, it's more accurate. And sometimes we'd scratch our heads. We just, we walk out of a customer meeting like, how could you not adopt this technology? But frankly, it just took that crazy exogenous event of coronavirus, I think, where all of a sudden just exposure risk, like in-person, extensive in-person coordination, or 5 people having to rig up ropes to go onto a wind turbine, or a bunch of folks having to kind of go inside a building to go up on a roof, right? All of a sudden, you just almost couldn't do business the old way. You had to look to new options, and frankly, like as you all know, like this technology, the way we operate, can really be performed in a contact-free way, right? We're not even we don't even have to set foot on the premises more often than not to conduct an inspection. So it just sometimes it does take that sort of crazy shock to sort of really change customer behavior, and for folks who may have been on the fence for a bunch of months, kind of finally get them to adopt this technology, because they just literally could not do the business the old way.
Yeah, no, definitely. And are you seeing mostly that uptick on the application, on the inspection side of things, or does that kind of extend across the board to kind of real estate and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting for us, and a lot of lessons learned. I think maybe it updates since we all spoke last time, but we're working much more heavily in sort of renewable energy, critical infrastructure. So absolutely no pause in that. In fact, quite an acceleration, particularly for these sort of energy generating assets, whether it's a utility grade solar field or wind turbines. Those are mission critical inspections that just must continue, right? And frankly, that was an area where we saw a lot of acceleration, and just a lot of folks who were already doing this started doing more. A lot of folks who maybe had a limited in-house program said, how the heck do we do this at bigger scale? And reached out to us in that kind of as a service context, or folks who were on the fence just said, look, I can't get folks out. We can't have 10 people coordinating this, so we just have to do it a new way. Similarly, I think as it kind of pertains to critical building inspection, we worked on a lot of either like a lot of industrial logistics facility, whether that's Amazon warehouses or other folks who, again, just really need to keep, that's the kind of the engine behind keeping everything running. And even same, you know, us working at kind of to inspect like the big box retailers or those kind of big commercial facilities where, you know, all of us are getting our paper towels or toilet paper or groceries from. It's just very, you know, very vital work that still needs to go on. You know, it was interesting for us, like, just because coronavirus happened, unfortunately, doesn't mean that other natural disasters and events aren't happening, right? So there's, as tornadoes kind of swept through the Southeast and Tennessee is kind of right as coronavirus was happening. You know, we still need to perform those very important roof inspections for insurance claims. You know, our hearts really go out to a family or a business who is, you know, you're basically at the shelter in place and all of a sudden you have a hole in your roof. That's a problem. So, you know, getting that claim adjusted, getting that family paid out and kind of somewhat back on their feet in this really doubly difficult time is important. And then, yeah, I think what, you know, real estate was one interesting one for us. You know, I think we're going more and more into kind of the enterprise inspection direction, but, you know, real estate is interesting. I think that there was initially just a bit of a shock wave across commercial and residential real estate. But frankly, you know, commercial realtors and residential realtors still need to do their work. And we really see a heavy shift towards digitization and to kind of these virtual open houses and like, just how do I portray where this commercial office is in relation to a highway or a rail yard? You know, often the exterior tends to be the most important, and, you know, drone technology tends to be a great way to showcase those sorts of features. So I think those industries have suffered a touch, but just the overall digitization of them have kind of more than compensated, at least from our little slice of the market, to really see no downturn there. So that's a bit comprehensive, but just gives you a sense of, I think for the folks who had the technology foundation laid to operate in this difficult environment, you know, we never really missed a beat, and that's across, you know, 2-3 continents and 7 to 10 different countries.
Definitely. No, thank you. Thank you for kind of jumping into the very comprehensive look over where you see the trends in it. It seems quite favorable so far. Matt, in your conversations with large enterprises, how have you seen COVID impacting their appetite to invest into drones? Are they not investing into anything overall, or are they kind of also, just as Dan suggested, that this is critical work they still need to do?
Yeah, a lot of everything Dan said resonates with what we're seeing in the market as well. So there's no way around it that budgets have gotten tighter. We're certainly organizing ourselves differently a little bit because we're not traveling. And when you put a company the size of Deloitte not all on planes and interacting with your clients, it's a little different for us too. But us aside, I'd say 4 things have emerged from our viewpoint that would probably be worth noting here when it relates to appetite. One is, and I'm going to steal a lot of sound bites from Dan, they're very similar. One is safety. So they're contactless, and, you know, they keep humans out of the loop. So folks, a lot more enterprise leaders and executives, they want to keep their folks safe and their workforce healthy. So using digital collection technologies like drones has been, you know, very favorable for them in that aspect. Then, and Dan used this one too, critical operations. He mentioned energy. We've got a lot of clients in that space too. There are certain things that just can't stop. Machines don't get sick, so we can go out and collect with these. They also offer really high data integrity capture, right? Which brings me to my next point. Something that we've gotten a lot more insight into as the technology's matured and we've had more client experiences is there's net savings associated with using the technology. So again, I'm stealing all Dan's notes, but he mentioned being locked in on value props. That's a lot of what we do. So, you know, we've baselined a lot of different KPIs and, you know, drone technology for a data collection use case. One, you're gonna take the potential human error rate out of it, right? So if you're looking for, you know, potential wildfire ignition sources, you're gonna limit, you know, the number of times where you're not gonna capture that. You're going to not go back and have a redundant inspection. There's a net savings associated with that. So the third one of that net savings. And then because there's been this shock to the system, the fourth one would be, it's been a path to the future for some. So now there's a little bit of time to experiment because some of our clients had the technology foundation laid, again, stealing a little bit from Dan, but now what can we use that for next while flexing to this new normal? So an example of that would be, well, we've still got to train our folks. Why don't we use the drones to capture live? How do we bring the field inside? All right, that's something we get all the time. We can use it for augmented reality, virtual reality trainings. We're doing a little bit of that as well. Another maybe spike in that area is our government clients have seen this as an opportunity to push their programs forward for all the same reasons I listed, but now is kind of the time. So we're supporting a lot of state and local entities as well, at least a handful of them today, about program building, because this is something they see as being part of their future. So nothing really different than what Dan mentioned, but appetite, I would say, has stayed very steady where we expected it. Some of the things have been shut off a little bit that weren't already established, but I've been pleasantly surprised, and been good for us, that the trajectory's pretty much stayed the same.
Got it. No, that's great to hear. And it seems pretty much overwhelmingly that COVID has been, a key force in getting enterprises to be more serious about their drone program and kind of diving deeper, as it's their only option to continue forward. Brad, I'd kind of like to turn to you on a little bit of another interesting way. Both drones and kind of your core technology, thermal cameras, are being used to potentially as medical devices to detect skin temperatures. Could you speak to that? Is that kind of a valuable market you guys see out there today? And or how feasible is the technology?
Yeah, so prior to COVID, this was a fairly small part of FLIR's business, but as soon as March came, we saw an uptick that was unprecedented in FLIR's history for elevated skin temperature screening. And so we already had solutions developed for this type of application, but the scale that we needed to get to meet international governments, private clients, there's a whole list of end users that came online as soon as COVID hit. And so our CEO, Jim Cannon, has 4 pillars for the company moving forward that are areas for growth and focus areas for the company. And in March, he added a 5th, which is the elevated skin temperature business. So we're actively deploying resources towards camera technology, software technology, a lot of machine vision and AI being built into the software to help scan people efficiently and accurately. It is definitely a complicated science to get a level of accuracy that people are comfortable with when screening for, in somebody's face. And actually the most accurate part of a human's face is the eye duct right here for screening temperature, which is interesting and something that I learned.
I never knew I would learn.
Yeah, and something that I learned throughout this process. And so that part of the business grew rapidly in Q2 and now into Q3. But it is really important to clarify the capabilities of the technology. There are certain camera models that you have to use to be able to do this. And it's also only used as a first line of defense. This is not going to diagnose COVID. This is simply going to tell you if you have an elevated skin temperature in your facial region. So it is not the end all be all. It is absolutely a way to amplify safety measures and act as that first line of defense. But naturally, I started to get a lot of calls and emails about wanting to do this from a drone. And to be super clear, this is not feasible via a drone. There are physical barriers, technology barriers. There are things that cannot be done. And most simply, you have to have an active black body in the frame to do elevated skin temperature screening. And almost never are drone operators putting a black body in their frame. So that's just one small detail that makes elevated skin temperature screening via drone not impossible, but pretty close. And so what came out of the COVID experience and this uptick in business is that people started getting really creative, right? And when we are still practicing social distancing, but the surveillance of large crowds, a lot of people are deploying thermal imaging drones to manage crowds outside in different parts of the world. So that's a use case that has become more prevalent over the past few months is that, managing of crowds. And so it has changed our business, absolutely. And specifically in different parts of the industrial technology segment. But for the drone users that are listening, please stay away from using drones or marketing drones for elevated skin temperature screening.
Good. Yeah. Thanks for bringing it to reality, but it's quite exciting to see, and potentially as you guys develop further, the future has a lot to hold. So,
Agreed.
yeah, it's exciting space, especially to see more on the medical devices side of things. To kind of wrap up the discussion around the pandemic, we've looked at data from the FAA, trying to estimate the size of the growth of the industry last year from 2018 to 2019. So I'd like to kind of take this time to look at what that growth might look like from 2019 to 2020. So we saw from 2018 to 2019, the market grew by fleet count in the commercial side by 40%. It kind of sounds like from this side, utilization might be higher. Do you guys feel the case that we're going to be seeing similar strong levels of growth for the commercial drone industry, even despite COVID-19? Kind of an open question.
Sure, I can start that off, and in conversations with companies like DroneBase and some of our international distribution partners, the growth of the industry, and this is, I know, a repeated theme that we've all talked about, but regulation is still the number one hurdle for a lot of users for BVLOS and operations over people. And although we are expecting, a remote ID rule here, hopefully by the end of the year, that is a good step in the right direction. But at the end of the day, the economies of scale are not there operating in 2 or 3 mile hurdles, as opposed to being able to operate at a 40 or 50 or 60 mile operation. So it's still a regulatory battle that the industry is going through. But I view this in 2 different ways. We're going to see some short-term pain. As both Matt and Dan were mentioning, a lot of end users are changing their budgets, right? And changing their spendings and really having to take a step back and look at how they can make their businesses more efficient. And so I see the early adopters in the drone industry are really doubling down and wanting to grow their drone programs because they see the cost savings, they see the safety, they see that high level of data integrity that drones can bring. And so those folks are absolutely going to help grow the industry. But at the same time, we're also seeing a lot of end users taking a step back because they don't believe in it quite yet. I think that those folks will eventually convert, as we all know the cost savings and the value propositions that drones bring. But I continue to see growth. And I think part of that, David, is, Part 107 was brought in August 2016. And as we know, Part 107 licenses expire after 2 years. And so there's going to be a big group and cohort of Part 107 pilots that said, okay, well, this was fun for 2 years, but I'm probably not going to go get my license again. So I think that that's a part of the factor that is showing a bit of a decrease maybe in growth. But I think over time, we're not going to have that problem in the drone industry. And I think we should expect over the next 3 to 5 years, pretty significant growth and really getting good glimpses of what this industry could be moving forward.
Yeah. No, a very good point on kind of seeing what that Part 107 retention rate is looking like. Kind of our past research showed that there's a lot of service providers out there making less than $50K a year and kind of being single entity. So I think there's a lot of great stuff they can do to kind of fill that time. It seems like DroneBase and a lot of these other networks are a pretty good option, especially this year. But it'll be interesting to see how many of them stay in the game moving forward.
Yeah,
Matt, Dan.
And I think that, I think just kind of to second some of what Brett was saying. Yeah, I think it's, again, I don't know exactly what growth metric you're gearing off of, but yeah, I think there's some kind of maybe hidden or underlying growth stories you will see from 2019 to 2020. I do think the drone software sector is kind of coming alive, particularly just as folks get enough data under the hood on a specific asset type or anomaly type to actually turn that into a meaningful threshold for machine learning to make a better decision on it. It just takes a couple of years to get enough anomalies in the tens of thousands to actually get statistical significance there. I think you're seeing kind of a similar flight to quality on the services side. So yeah, I think that's a very important distinction to make between maybe just overall hardware top line versus just utilization rates by and large, right? So, I think that we just see those professional operators who may have just been willing to make, okay, you got your Part 107, right? But did you make a follow-on investment, right? Did you invest in M300? Did you invest in a FLIR sensor? Did you go to a FLIR ITC training? Did you go to a DJI UTC training? I mean, I think for the folks who have distinguished and differentiated themselves, often we kind of see and feel supply constraints at those more technically demanding, skilled requirements that kind of are a blend of hardware, software, and kind of service technical excellence. So I truly do feel like supply constraints in certain areas of that market. And yeah, I think that to everyone's point here, and I think doubling down on some of what Matt was saying, like, yeah, I would be super nervous if I was advancing like a drone program line budget item, because I just, running a company myself, everything that looks like a new cost just is getting a pretty hard pass at most companies. But I think if you are kind of move past innovation groups and you're working with line P&L holders, and you're really coming through as, hey, this is our line item for inspection, here's how it's going to go down by 25%, and oh, by the way, the technology is, drone technology, how we're doing that, that's a thumbs up across the board, right? So I do think you really have to, I think a lot of growth is coming from having gotten through kind of some of the key value proposition points, truly business and P&L holders feeling like we're taking costs out of their business. I think that's a green light for any enterprise in 2020. So I think when the dust settles at the end of the year, not as clear in terms of like hardware top line, but I do think a lot of utilization increase, a lot of flight to quality, and people really committed to making a career in this industry, and just a lot more kind of this technology touching a key asset, a key piece of energy infrastructure, a key building as its inspection tool in 2020.
Yeah, that's I agree, and I kind of see a lot of those trends, just even from the conversation we had now. People who are maybe dabbling their toes in the industry, both from the adoption side, but also from the services side, might not be having such a great year. But people who have really gone deep, a lot of enterprises that have invested beforehand will kind of come out of this pretty great. Sonal, Matt, do you guys have anything else to add on kind of your thoughts on the progress in the industry?
Yeah, so I would want to add something like drone adoption is not just a technology change, it also requires strategic change, especially when you're talking about enterprises. One thing that I'm excited to see, and I'm also curious how this would shape is now, because COVID has forced a lot of big enterprises, especially, to rethink their strategies. I'm envisioning all those big enterprises who were running drones as drone operations as a pilot program would want to bring drone operations into their mainstream strategies. And we would see, if not a change in adoption, but definitely more scaling in these enterprises when it comes to drone operations. So I'm already seeing a few of our customers who are moving towards that 5 to 6 pilot teams are now being recognized by the higher management, and then the drone operations are being brought into mainstream strategies. I think that's a big change I'm hoping to see this year. Yeah,
positions for further growth in the future.
Yeah, I think I can round this out, David. This is what happens when you go last and you're on a panel full of smart people. Most of your points are taken, but I agree with everything. Just maybe a couple points to summarize and put a bow on them is, I agree with Brett's upfront point that technology is not the barrier, it's still regulation. And when we think about scaling, to Sonal's point and Dan's point, and Brett even said doubling down, but it's more about where folks are already have dipped their toes in the water, which I think is a point you've made, scaling those use cases, because they've already seen, Sonal's made this point, we've already flipped the switch on the strategy. We're going to do things differently. This is better for us. So we're going to more heavily invest because we're solving real business problems, which was Dan's point about, the innovation folks. Yeah, well, those funds are getting cut a little bit. But if drones are already being used as a tool to solve a real business problem for a company, such as asset management, some type of delivery or logistics play, that money is going to keep coming because it's coming from a different bucket, right? So I would expect scaling to occur in those areas, and it'll be industry specific because of that. I don't know whether that'll mean more platforms flying through the sky. I do think, though, the utilization of the technology is going to continue to rise in those focus areas.
And just to add to what Matt was saying there, we're talking quite a bit about enterprise users, but according to our research and our data, public safety is probably 50% of our end user base. Now, there's a lot of risk in that market. And I know a lot of the drone industry has focused on public safety because the value proposition is so clear. It's clear, it's defined, it's proven. And, with what's going on, this kind of ties into the COVID thing, right? State and local funding right now is a huge problem. And more times than not, you're probably going to see public safety agencies getting rid of their drone programs because they haven't necessarily seen the cost savings like an enterprise would. And so a tale of caution to a lot of the drone industry, the public safety market might be a little bit more difficult moving forward. The budgets might get a little bit tighter and those procurement cycles might get a little bit longer. So, trust me, we understand the value of drones in public safety. Our core mission is to help save lives and livelihoods, but I still think that the growth in the industry is going to be coming a lot from the enterprise side, with public safety maybe slowing down a little bit moving forward. But we all know that a lot of firefighters and police departments and search and rescue teams are using drone technology, and I don't necessarily think that's going to stop. It's just going to be really tough from a budgetary perspective for a lot of these entities.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. I think public safety will be a very interesting place to watch, and also, government budgets are being hit a lot these days. To jump on to the next topic is more focusing on the technology side, and we'll jump into the regulations later on in the panel. I think it's definitely a very big limiting factor that we'll cover later on in the panel. But I want to jump quickly into the autonomy space. We've seen a lot of hype this year specifically, I think more so than other years, around the need or maybe the value or the technical capability of current drones and their ability to fly autonomously or have fairly automated features. I mean, even looking at things like smart AI inspections on the new DJI Matrice 300 RTK. Despite this being pretty marketing fluff in some way, I would like to have a conversation about how much of this is reality, what's the real value proposition there for these autonomous drones, as the regulations are as they are today. Kind of before we jump into those larger questions, Sonal, I just kind of wanted to begin with you and just understand how ready is this technology from your perspective, and is it at the level where putting regulations on the side, that enterprises could really kind of deploy and adopt these type of autonomous solutions?
So there are different aspects to it. So there's autonomy in drone operations itself, and then there's a need for autonomy in the drone data related workflows. So we are seeing definitely a spike in requirement of how the drone related workflow or data related workflows are being automated, because if we see a lot of enterprises who were early adopters of drones, they are starting to see this huge data being mounted in their servers, and they don't know what to do with them. But going back to the point of automated flights, there are additional aspects to it. There are supporting technologies like GPS or magnetic interferences that affect this technology. So I would say, yes, we have the core technology. So in a given ideal scenario, yes, we can do automated flights, but there are these additional secondary supporting technologies that I believe are not ready, which affects these autonomous flights.
Got it.
So yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how that rolls. And do you think that's something that will come together in kind of the following years, or is that something that's a little bit on a longer horizon?
So there's definitely work being done in the industry of moving away from relying on GPS and moving towards more computer vision for autonomous flights. I'm really hopeful for that, because it's not just the drone industry who's investing and researching on it. We have parallel industries like autonomous cars and other robotics industry who's also working on this. So if not our industry specific, we'll definitely have some learnings from other industries which can be adopted in drones. So yeah, I'm definitely hopeful that the horizon is not too far. So we'll see it coming soon.
Definitely. And Matt, just to go over to your side, I think I haven't quite seen enterprises so willing to adopt this technology, at least from the insurance costs, and kind of nothing being too clear. Are you seeing enterprises continuing to ask for this type of solution, this type of maybe drone in the box with automated deployment, or is it something that's still a bit on the fringe?
Depends on how you frame the question. In individual conversations, ask yes. It reminds me of like when the industry was newer and you talk to executives and they get excited and they're like, yeah, I want drones. And then you start unpacking that and you're like, well, why do you want to use them? Defining your use case. You know, everybody wants the best. So if they hear there's autonomy, then hey, we want it. So desire is there, but when you start talking to them about it, comes back to the use cases again. I guess the word I would use would be complexity. So we start talking to a utility executive flying in a live wire environment, and this probably will resonate with Dan. You know, that technology we need to make sure is really, really strong, because what we're there to do is to prevent wildfires, and, you know, one glitch and you get the bad end result of that. Maybe more for clients we've talked to in like telecom space, makes a little bit more sense for the autonomous drone in a box, flight path, that use case makes a little bit more sense. We've evaluated some of the technologies to date, talked to clients about them. I do think it's trending in that direction, but it's going to be use case specific, like I was mentioning. And of course, we're always going to have to stay in lockstep with regulation and make sure whatever we're pitching out there is going to meet the FAA's rules and regs. So I think we're heading there, but it's ultimately going to come down to what is the use case? Is it safe to deploy the technology for that use case? And even in some cases, well, there's going to be a human being out there no matter what for some of these things until that piece of the pie is solved as well. And if they're already a drone pilot, like several of our use cases, think the utility inspections, you don't actually need the autonomy, which is just a more expensive piece. And we just talked about budget. So my 2 cents.
No, I mean, it makes sense. Yeah, if you already have the pilot out there, you don't necessarily value having to train your pilot less. You already train them, you know, and they're already deployed on site as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that trend shifts in the future. Brett, just to kind of turn to you on the thermal side and kind of the value of thermal for kind of imaging and also enabling autonomous functions. We've obviously seen thermal, you know, quite impactful in autonomous cars. Will thermal play a similar role for drones?
Yeah, absolutely. And for some context, we have an ADAS business, which is basically a 360-degree sensor suite that goes on autonomous vehicles, where we have built-in machine vision and AI for different classifications like people and stop signs and animals and everything that you would encounter on your daily drive. And so that technology is hooked directly into the autonomous braking system, right? So I'm sure everybody remembers a few years ago, the old woman that was hit in Tempe, Arizona by the Uber car. A great use case and example is we went back to that exact same location with a thermal equipped autonomous vehicle, and we were able to see that lady at 600 feet out. And so if thermal was on that autonomous vehicle, she would have been safe, and the car would have seen her with plenty of room to stop. So that same concept is no different for the drone industry. We're already seeing companies like Iris Automation put FLIR's cameras on board with machine vision to be able to classify trees and aircraft and different things that you would encounter in flight. And so I think moving forward, it only makes practical sense to have thermal on board when it comes to airborne sense and avoid capabilities, because people are going to be operating at night. You know, I know a lot of the drone industry lives in San Francisco. That fog comes in fast. And so having thermal on board for airborne sense and avoid is going to be where the industry moves in the future, just because it's a very simple, easy to deploy safety tactic. And so I see autonomy having that absolutely looped in on board. And that's already happening. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for it to develop and deploy ultimately. And the FAA is going to have to see the value of having thermal on board for sense and avoid as well, which we are working on. But as far as the full autonomy goes and how it's such a buzzword in the drone industry, but what does it really mean? And is it actually being deployed? And I look at it in two different ways, from a hardware perspective and then from a software perspective. And so autonomy and hardware, and this is to quote your predecessor, Colin, David, as well as our friend Chris Anderson at 3DR. The quicker we can get to drone flights being boring and from the push of a button, the better off we're all going to be. And so from the hardware side, the technology is there, right? We see tons of drone in a box concept where it's easy to deploy. It's self-sustaining. The case is going to charge the aircraft. All the data is going to be streamed directly from that box. The technology is absolutely there, but to sound like a broken record, the regulation's not. That is truly BVLOS, where you're operating out of a command center with your drone boxes deployed at strategic areas. And so that is going to be where the drone industry moves in the future as soon as regulation catches up. But what Matt was saying is that when you hear autonomy from a software side, people want easy and accessible software data, and telecom is a great example. The quicker you can fly around your asset and autonomously identify an anomaly, the quicker you're going to be able to move on to the next asset and inspect it. So that demand is already there. I think that the technology is still a little bit behind when it comes to the accuracy of those anomaly classifications, but it's absolutely happening. And again, as Matt said, end users, when they hear that and they hear that that exists, they want it. Now, how scalable is that and how easy is it to deploy? Still a little bit to be seen, but the industry is absolutely moving there. I think that the software side of autonomy is going to move quicker than the hardware side, but as quick as we can get to boring flights with the push of a button, I'm excited when we get to that part of the industry, which I don't think is too far from now. Yeah.
I always like to liken drones in some way to kind of like the data pipes for the digital age. So just working in the background, doing important things. But
I mean, remember 10 years ago when we had cell phones that all you could do was, it was big and clunky and all you could do was make a phone call, and now look, right? I think that that's the drone industry is going to follow in the same IoT product development and path. So.
Yeah. And Dan, kind of from your side, working with those large enterprises that do need to kind of scale up their operations today, what is that value proposition for autonomy for them? And how do you plan DroneBase around kind of that shift to potential autonomy in the future?
Yeah, and look, I mean, very smart and good points made all around. And just things I would double down on from there are, look, I think we kind of like the Tesla approach. I don't like the so much, let's go into a room somewhere and then 7 years later we'll emerge with like the perfect autonomous drone in the box. We kind of like, let's just be out there doing the work, and like we should be getting smarter and more automated every single flight, right? So for us, it's more about what is the minimal data capture to get the customer a statistically accurate decision, every time. And then it's just about what's the most elegant flight plan to go collect that data. I mean, look, frankly, I do think we're layering in more and more and more flight automation. I mean, every day, we have seen, I think, is just in our RFP. I just can't imagine by 2021 that, really not the entire flight, but I can't imagine there won't be a component of autonomous flight in basically every flight we do. It's seen as kind of increasingly a must-have in enterprise RFPs, both for horizontal type flight as well as vertical type flight applications. And just think, that's our perspective, right? We just want to get smarter every flight, get more autonomous every flight, but like be able to do the work. And yeah, I think that once you kind of leave California and you go talk to a subject matter expert in, Texas or Florida or Pennsylvania, they actually are greatly comforted by having an expert, still human expert on site that is operational, is technically skilled, is knowledgeable, has safety best practices, and even can kind of regain manual control even during a purely autonomous flight. That actually is comforting, and as folks hear about kind of more utopian or just forward leaning, sometimes that can raise concerns that may be invisible to us as like technologists and people who are just complete evangelists for the drone industry. So just knowing your audience, a human being and a machine are actually really powerful together. They're both kind of dumb without the other, but of course, like we like the machine doing more and more and more, and the human just getting to that next kind of value added skill that they could be doing in the field while a drone is flying. And then, yeah, it's continues to be remarkable to me just how interdisciplinary this whole field is across hardware, software, and services, and how many technologies it touches. Has been interesting for us in terms of technology. Just giving the FLIR example, but I think we certainly see. Let's just take in the building category, see kind of the high-end enterprise power users. They were more typically the ones who wanted to adopt something like thermal, where you're really detecting ponding, moisture damage, those most critical aspects of what would damage a roof, and those were kind of the early adopters there. We've seen early adoption of higher end data types like thermal and something like wind inspection, where you're seeing for the first time we're seeing kind of thermal thermal only RFPs for wind turbines, so which is a little bit new and kind of a leading edge use case. You can kind of get an X-ray scan of a wind turbine or some of these industrial assets with thermal on board. But yeah, I think also has been I think very interesting. So seeing those power enterprise users adopt those new data sets, those kind of causal data sets. But I think really eye-opening for us was increasingly working in the solar industry in 2019 and now 2020. That's interesting in that, for that higher end data set, that thermal data IR data set is really causal for that industry. Doing an RGB or an image only flight over a utility grade solar field will tell you something, but not much. But it's really kind of table stakes and expected for every single solar flight, obviously, that you're going to be using that higher end data set of thermal and IR. So, I think that's a great example of, a little interdisciplinary, but that a higher value data set really unlocking an industry that would have just been shut off without it. So I think that we've learned a lot by doing that. I'm kind of intrigued and interested both to watch that play out in solar, and then think about those other types of data or other types of sensors that could unlock another vertical or two going forward. So
yeah, no, I agree with your point on kind of any change being stepwise. Everything is incremental steps, and the first autonomous flight will have a fully trained pilot behind it who's ready to take control, and probably will for maybe even a year or two, into it as well, or even potentially longer, depending on the regulations. To kind of,
David, can I make one point? Again, listening to these things just brings up thoughts in my head. So initially, I had focused my comments on autonomy related to the flight services part. I like how Brett broke it down, hardware and software. But just bridging back to Sonal's initial comments about automating the processes after the flight services, right? So there's a huge surge there, and Dan laid it out really well. It's not going to be, you're not going to flip a switch, everything's going to be fully autonomous. This is piecemeal. We're trying to identify the pieces of the process, starting from flight services, but then to the software back end of what are we trying to get insights of? Finding the heavy manual, repeatable processes that we can either run like an AI or ML model that we're getting really good data with via drone collection because we can get so close. Develop that model, automate that piece, automate the transfer of the data. We're looking at it like that, really drilling down from the high level and getting tactical to that process. We're going okay, that's something we can look to automate. So I just felt like my answer was a little bit myopic and focused on one thing, and then hearing the other smart folks talk, I was like, yeah, there's a big search for autonomy there on the back end.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I think definitely first we'll see autonomy on.
Oh yeah.
Well, we're just saying first we'll see autonomy on the analytics side, and we already are and have been for a while.
Yeah.
Dan.
And then I'd say not different than just the field use case, right? Where you find kind of a technically skilled drone pilot working with autonomous flight. I mean, exactly to Matt's point, as we look to automate more and more of our analysis, right? We still have on staff, like a wind blade turbine engineer, right? Marking marking and finding anomalies for that algorithm, a commercial insurance adjuster with 20 years of experience doing that, like a solar systems engineer doing the same thing on the solar side, right? So I still think great human expert paired with a great technology training and algorithm, still need that human technical foundation laid. It's only as good as that expert's kind of basis to form it, but then the algorithm can do more and more and more and more of the work.
Certainly. To kind of expand on Dan's last point around looking at different high-end data sets, and kind of talking more broadly about technology that's been advanced already, but also potentially needs to be advancing in the future. What type of data sets are you guys seeing that's in high demand? Is Lidar something that's becoming more and more common? Are there different type of sensors that might be out there in the market? Obviously, I guess, Brett, I'll start with you on this one. You guys introduced really interesting the C310 last year. It was kind of like the first gas sniffing drone sensor in itself. What else are you guys seeing out there in the market? And are you exploring kind of new avenues and new types of sensors moving forward?
Yeah, I see a big increase in demand for low swap LiDAR. That's something that's being deployed across a lot of different industries. I think that the agricultural industry is starting to pick up more. I know when I first got into this industry, everybody thought that agriculture was going to be the first and the biggest adopter of drone technology, and boy, has that not been the case. But I think that that's starting to change. I think that multispectral becoming more affordable, the data being more insightful is going to really spur adoption in agriculture. So I think that companies are going to be looking at different types of data sets, because high resolution RGB at this point is so well understood, so well adopted that people want more, right? And that really points to the growth in thermal. And from a narrow perspective, what we're hearing from the market is that zoom features and high resolution are really the key. From a sensing perspective, you have to be able to zoom at least a 20 or 30x optical or digital zoom. Always demand for higher resolution imagery, even though the image quality isn't always just the pixel count. There's a lot of factors that go into the quality of an image that is not, again, just a 640 by 512 resolution camera. So I think the payloads are going to get smaller, as I'm sure a lot of the listeners saw. We released a product called the Hadron. It's 42 grams. It literally sits in the palm of my hand. The packaging feels like there's nothing in there. And that's got a 320 boson inside and a 12 megapixel RGB camera with an IMU. So, the sensors are going to continue to shrink so we can increase flight times. And this is in the future, but I'm pretty aware of the capabilities of hyperspectral. And I think that hyperspectral, when it starts to be more palatable from a price point and as well as a data processing perspective, is really going to unlock a lot of new use cases. And so I also see being payloads and different imaging capabilities being more interoperable and being swappable in the field, as opposed to it being quite a chore to change out your payload. I think that you're going to see more military style pods, I guess, if that's the right term, where you have multiple sensors inside and you can kind of toggle back and forth between them, so you don't have to land. The software is integrated, right? And so I may be talking quite a bit into the future, but I see that that's where the industry is going to go. And there's going to be more adoption of advanced data sets because, as we know, drones are simply a means to what the data you're collecting is. It's just a flight platform, and the camera that you're carrying and the sensor that you're carrying is really the value from a drone solution perspective. So that's, what we're saying. And we try to not be hypothetical and really put data to our hypothesis when it comes to a lot of these things. And so, we communicate with the market a lot. And this is really feedback from what I hear end users requesting.
Got it. The pod idea, I think, is something we're already kind of seeing happen. I think the Hadron is actually a pretty good example of it.
Agreed.
Of it already, and we're seeing the Zemus H20 from H22 from DJI, which pairs 3. Matt, just jumping over to your side, what type of, I guess, data output / sensing modules are your customers looking at that's not already available in the market?
I don't know if there's anything that they're looking for that's not available. We have a big three that we're seeing. So it's the HD imagery capture, but Brett nailed it. What's really important to our customers is the ability to zoom. So some of those new sensor technologies that can get us in close. So something we deal with a lot is both distribution and transmission inspections in the utility environment. Distribution poles, no problem. Transmission towers are really complex, and we got to zoom in and see some things from far away, and we can't fly too close. So that comes in handy there. The other ones are IR and Lidar, like Brett mentioned, seeing a big uptick for Lidar, and the use cases associated with Lidar are expanding for our client set. So those are the big three that we see, and it's the same. The future is consolidating those and getting them all onto the one platform and going out and serving multiple use cases and multiple end user groups. So instead of the defect detection operational unit within an energy company, whether that's oil and gas or power and utilities, going out and just flying, let's go get our HD imagery pictures, and then we'll do a separate mission, maybe even with a separate vendor for the veg management group within the same organization. Just go get it all at once, bring the overhead costs down, and everyone gets the point. I see the heads nodding on the call. So yeah, nothing that's, I think the technology is there for most of the use cases, David, to answer your question. Those are the big things we're seeing in the market.
Got it. And Sonal, to kind of look over at your side and kind of what you're doing on the software angle, and kind of that being your main focus at DJI, is there somewhere you see a gap in the software side and the software market for enterprises that is still lacking in the industry, or something that's already improved this year?
I think one difference between hardware and software that we have to look is hardware. Yes, we are moving towards more one size fits all model, versus when we look at software, one size doesn't fit all, right? There are specific needs for individual verticals and to an extent to individual enterprises as well. An ABC company in all industry will not have the exact same requirements when it comes to workflow or other software needs for an XYZ oil industry company. So I think that's a development that we are seeing, and I think at DJI we are also starting to focus towards that, and our SDK capabilities is exactly what it's meant for. This is exactly what it's meant for, and I think we are moving towards more and more collaboration to provide more customized solution to these individual industries and individual enterprises.
Makes sense. Does anyone else have any kind of feedback on technology you're really excited about, or innovations that have enabled kind of your operations a lot this year?
One, and it's about, it plays off of Sonal's point of, staying flexible is what I, heard from her, and meeting the client where they're at. So there was a time when things were just so niche that it was hard to stitch these things together, and it's selfishly talking about what our position is in the market of sewing these things together and playing that integrator role. Now it's when we go to a client, all right, let's talk about your collection pieces. And so if they want to fly 200s versus 300s or Mavics or whatever, right hammer for the right nail in the use case. But we have the flexibility. I know I just named them all from one manufacturer, but even if that was a different manufacturer, we can stitch those together, meet cyber requirements for transfer. The front end can be Workday, ServiceNow, Salesforce. The back end can be any cloud environment that they desire, and we can stitch these things together for them. That's what's really exciting for just me personally, but it's also good professionally for the market. That's how we're getting those really good end-to-end results. We talked about automation earlier. When you can stitch the things together, you can start identifying, well, where are the weak points, where are the strong points, and going from there. So we're starting to get that full end-to-end asset management solution, and that's been really exciting for us. So it's not anything brand new. We're taking the best of the market, but now is that they're fitting into the right places and operating really smoothly.
Yeah, it's exciting. To hop into our last question, kind of as we started running around time, or last topic, I should say, is kind of something we alluded to, of course, regulations. We're obviously seeing, as Brett alluded to a bit earlier in the panel, the remote ID laws that were originally proposed earlier by the FAA. We expect to have some sort of conclusion towards the end of this year. And then also kind of, I think a bit more clear is on the European side. We're seeing with the new EASA regulations, quite a clear roadmap for them in 2 to 3 years, and what's happening in that market and kind of setting out boundaries for the open, specific, and even use-based categories. Just gonna stay in Europe for a second. I mean, Dan, DroneBase, you guys made a lot of announcements around your focus on the European market. And I would just like to see just your thoughts on how these new regulation changes may or may not be impacting that side of the business, just as we speak to more of the AirWorks European crowd here.
Sure. Yeah, and as you pointed out, look, I think we've learned a lot in the past year. DroneBase is a American company, right? But we formally established our DroneBase Europe, which is a GmbH, which is headquartered in Germany, but now kind of working extensively through Western and Central Europe. And look, frankly, I think that we kind of welcome a more and more unified European standard. Like, certainly one benefit of the United States is that airspace tends to be a federal asset. So a whole lot of land is covered at least by one regulatory body with certainly input, from many others. But, that has been, I'd say, a strength of the U.S., at least when the U.S. kind of makes a move, it happens kind of nationwide. So, I think we've been, the more that Europe can, I think, operate from one standard, one unified standard, even if it's not everything we would hope and dream for, that frankly is easier, I think, than a more balkanized approach where you really have to deeply study each one and you kind of cross a border that's kind of an invisible border, but all of a sudden the rules are kind of quite different from one country to another. And look, frankly, we're working with best-in-class companies that are continent-wide or span the U.S. and span Europe and North America, and so just for that customer having a good understanding that whether we're working in the Mediterranean region, in Northern Europe, even the UK and Ireland, maybe not so much the UK now, right? But like that one set of rules apply that kind of translate to proper scheduling, flight times, reasonable access to airspace. So yeah, I think the more that looks like a unified, harmonized standard, the better, and encourage to see steps in that direction.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of see it as kind of like the Part 107 finally happening in Europe in some way. It's obvious it's different, but it's kind of opening up the window, at least, to the drone industry and making things transparent, and kind of open for business, at least.
No, absolutely. And I think it's interesting for us just as companies scale, and I think it's just, as we say, kind of everything we said here, it's as companies mature and really get to different levels of scale, right? We see some scale here with our company and kind of across assets, whether it's working with like a utility that owns both solar and wind. But look, a lot of companies really have that geographic scale, and this is a global industry. This is a global technology, and being able to be relevant for your biggest customers who have that global footprint is really important. And then, yeah, I think within that, just glad to hear we were kind of getting not dragged to Europe, but just our customers were bringing us there. So for us, kind of a very harmonious moment where a little bit of a more Europe-wide standard could be adopted is really beneficial for us.
Yeah, certainly. Matt, just to kind of hop over back on the remote ID side and what's happening here in the US, there were some earlier critiques about the remote ID from the hobbyist side of things, just as people were early kind of interpreting that rule in a very long set of regulations or proposed regulations. How have your corporate clients kind of taken to those proposed regulations, and the FAA's approach, and what are you looking forward to in the final version coming towards the end of this year?
So overall, I think it's a good thing, a great development. So I think it comes down to audience, right? So the hobbyists are going to have a different opinion. That's why you're asking the question.
For sure.
The corporate clients. So our corporate clients, enterprise clients, I would say it's neutral overall, because for many of them, they're not the ones at the end of the day that are going to have to be, there's a lot of the models are still hybrid, and they've got a lot of flight vendors and service providers flying for them. So they're like, as long as they're meeting their requirements, like that's great. What I will say, some of the conversations though that they see as a net positive is everyone likes certainty. So the ability to trace back auditability down to the platform level is big for them. Some talk about that in a sense of physical security, bad actors, so we can figure out who did what a little bit easier, right? Or just have a little bit more accountability when it comes to either managing their vendor landscape or their platforms out in the field. So that's really been their look. There haven't been any really strong reactions as there have been with other groups like the hobbyists. And then, obviously we've got some of my colleagues work directly with the FAA on this stuff. So a little more strong opinions maybe over there, but in the commercial landscape, it's been mostly net neutral. And I would say more towards favorable because of that auditability, traceability.
Yeah. Brett, yeah, turning over to your side as well, what are your feelings on the new remote ID law? Obviously kind of, it's alluding to, I think, a lot more regulations around UTM and whatnot from the FAA and moving forward. But, how do you see and how does FLIR see these new proposed regulations?
So I actually did sit down and read the whole thing, which was painful in itself, because the repetition is pretty remarkable in that proposed law. So if I were a hobbyist, I'd be upset, understandably so. AMA fields are going to have a new classification. They're going to have to go through a new process. You can't fly anywhere you want. But the growth in our industry comes from the commercial and the enterprise side. And unfortunately, if the hobbyist proposed rule was not laid out the way it is, that would be a big loophole in the system moving forward for a lot of commercial bad actors. They could say, I'm a hobbyist, so I can kind of do what I want. Now, to keep airspace safe, and at the end of the day, we have to keep manned aviation safe. And if you don't have the proposed rules around the hobbyist operators, it's going to be really, really difficult to do that. And so are there flaws in the remote ID rule? Yes. The business plan's a little wonky. The way that they're going to be charging is a little bit off, I think. But overall, for our industry, the more known the regulations become, the more understood they become, the easier it is for leadership and executive teams to adopt the technology, because it goes back to risk, right?
Yeah.
If you can be risk adverse moving forward and operate within the policy landscape and framework, you're going to be able to put a more comprehensive program in place, because you're going to know exactly how to operate and in what confines can you operate. And so I see the remote ID rule from both sides, but again, as part of the enterprise side of this business, I think it's really, really important. And remote ID unlocks UTM, period. Without remote ID and without having some type of accountability of where that person is operating, and having the police department and different authorities have access to that information, it's going to be really difficult for us to realize UTM. And so moving forward, I think a lot of the concepts that are proposed in that rule are really good ones. And I think that as quickly as we can get to a universal UTM system, and I agree on the global scale, this needs to be closer to a one size fits all from regulation, whether people are operating in APAC or EMEA. It needs to be pretty close to the same for the industry to be really impactful. So again, remote ID getting passed will really help UTM become a reality and more condensed airspace. At the end of the day, high value assets are in condensed areas. There's absolutely business in remote areas, but unless you can fly in Class B, 5 to 10 to 15 miles, fly BVLOS, you're going to be operating over people at that point. But the industry can't grow unless you can fly in Class B easily and take that risk of flying over people. So in parallel, as safety precautions continue to increase and become more robust, with things like parachute systems and onboard sense and avoid and ground-based sense and avoid, all these different technologies are just going to help UTM of the future become a reality. So I'm a proponent of more regulation in our industry. And I think that as we all become more familiar with the regulations, it's going to help growth in the industry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think kind of taking it back to an earlier idea we talked about is, drones being that boring data pipe for the future of the economy. Unless we do have, harmonized rules, at least are fairly standard across the world. And at least they also enable, flight pretty much everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Assuming the risk and obviously mitigating the risk, we're not going to get there. So it's definitely a step in that direction.
And not to go on too much of a tangent or open this thing up too much, but package delivery because of COVID has now been put on a pedestal. I think for a lot of people is they don't want to leave their homes. They want to have things delivered to them. You cannot do package delivery at scale without a robust UTM system and remote ID system. I live in Class B. I'm sure, Matt, Dan, you guys are, I know where you are. You're definitely in heavy air, manned airspace. These are types of things that will make package delivery a true reality. So anyways, we haven't touched on package delivery yet, but it's going to be a very, very big player moving forward, I think.
Yeah. We're running a little bit over time, but I do kind of want to get to the package delivery topic at the same time. I think it just kind of brings to the question of, I kind of see on some side there is the balance of the hobbyist aspect in that a lot of, I think, people on this panel, but also more broadly come from the hobbyist space. And there is a worry that are we scaring people away from eventually becoming commercial drone pilots? And on the other side as well, it's like, enabling this great thing such as package delivery. I would also at the same time like to just say, I think what the industry has been doing already in public safety, energy, inspection, insurance, real estate is amazing. So amazing already. Me getting my Chipotle or my Amazon package a little bit faster is maybe not as valuable as saving a life. But I mean, do you guys see, and I guess, this kind of steps out of a lot of people's bounds, what are your expectations for the scale of package delivery when looking at other technologies?
Well, I'll jump in there. Well, taking a look at what's being done now, and I look at a company like Zipline, right, who just said, you know what, we're going to go to Africa, and they're doing close to 1,000, 2,000 flights a week of delivery and long distance flights. And so I think we need to take a look at what they've learned operating in that type of environment, as delivering blood and critical supplies. That's going to be, and they're using a fixed wing aircraft, right, with a catapult system, which is nothing that we've seen, here in the States. Now, the way we probably view it is having Amazon go from their distribution center directly to your home and maybe a 3-home path and then returning back for a refill and a charge. But the bigger, heavier payloads and cargo deliveries that companies like Zipline are focused on, I think that you have to break it down into 2 different areas. And that's why, I see package delivery for the Amazon type operations. They're probably going to be operating at a pretty low altitude, 100, 200 feet, maybe 300 feet AGL, relatively short flight times. But now as you're carrying bigger packages and Zipline type operations, I think that we will need to fly higher than 400 feet, and it's going to be safer to ultimately fly at 400 feet or above for those types of operations. So that's another aspect of regulation that I think is being overlooked, is increasing that ceiling for different types of operations. And for whatever reason, UAM is still a big hot topic. Now, I've been to Uber Elevate multiple times, and I really have a hard time sitting back and looking at, man, we can't get Advil and a Slurpee delivered at scale, but we're going to be putting people in autonomous drones and flying them from LAX to, the Valley. I just have a hard time seeing that in the near future. So there's a lot of kinks to be worked out. But anyways, that's kind of my perspective on the drone delivery space.
I'll just say it sounds like open skies for the drone industry on that side. Does anyone else want to add in a last comment? We're really running over at this time. Matt, Soto?
I'll add one. Yeah. So agree with everything Brett said. It's not going to work until we get the remote ID up and running. Use cases are going to define where the demand's going to come from, whether it's that last mile or long distance travel. We've actually looked at the zip line model quite a bit and looking to mimic some of that for medical deliveries in the US, COVID testing kits, things like that. We've got some ConOps developed working with some really smart people from all the way from the WEF to Village Reach and Gates Foundation's involved, and just a lot of people are rallying around this. So I think the current pandemic's accelerated this a little bit, and Brett's comments, and I think something in the future we're going to see too. It's the pod concept, but instead of just looking at a very specific solution when we're grouping up sensors, it's how can we coordinate across industries to meet multiple needs. So take ourselves out even just an enterprise, but if we're going to fly the utility corridors, and I'll come back to our area, Dan, in LA area, if we're going to do that, why can't we pair that up with other beyond data user needs, but like deliveries as well? So that's one of the things we've actually thought about. If we're going to fly on this medical delivery use case we're working on, which is in San Diego, California, there's a good opportunity to not only deliver what we're going to deliver, which is blood samples and medical testing kits, but let's collect some data along the way. So I think that there's going to be a future where these things are going to merge together. And the reason why is because, one, it just makes practical sense. But the second one is because we just talked about budgets decreasing. And this is a good way to, again, lower overhead and basically two birds, one stone. I think that's something we're going to see a little bit more of as well.
Definitely. Sona, do you have anything last add, or should we close it out?
I would just say that I am a big fan of where our industry is heading. It might be, to Brett's point, it might be UAM being a reality, might be far, but I think we have to start today. And I think being commercial, combining UTM and UAM together, which I think NASA is starting to do, is a step in right direction. And yeah, there are small delivery drones like Zipline. I would still consider Zipline smaller as compared to Volo drones, which are aiming to deliver heavy cargo. So I think there's a lot of possibilities for us there, where we can see a lot of different aircrafts with different applications hovering above our houses, and we need regulations for that.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. And thank you all for joining the panel today. For everyone who's been listening, you guys can reach us on the Slack channel. So, feel free to reach out to us individually, start up conversations using Braindate, and otherwise enjoy the rest of the AirWorks content. All right. Have a good one all.
Thank you, David.